Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming to this Saturday morning presentation. Today we have Introduction to Genealogy, and it will be presented by the Field Library and the Colin T. Naylor Archives local history librarian, Rachel Stock. She will give us a wonderful presentation on how to do a genealogical search. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. The program will be recorded, so you do not have to turn your cameras on if you do not want to. We ask that you keep your microphones muted until the end of the presentation. Please put your questions in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the presentation. And we will also like you to provide us with your email addresses in the chat so that Rachel can send out genealogical charts afterwards. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rachel Stock. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to express my gratitude to Francisco for being here with us today. It's difficult to manage as a host and the person managing the Zoom account. So thank you so much, Francisco. We really appreciate it. As Francisco said, my name is Rachel Stock. I'm the local history librarian. I'm really excited to be here today. So let's get started. We have a couple of objectives for this presentation. The first objective is to identify a starting point for our genealogical pursuits. We want to locate primary source records. And finally, we're going to discuss access to resources at the field library, but also beyond the field library. So if you are not visiting us from New York today, not to worry, we have resources for everybody. So let us begin our discussion on genealogy with a little bit of a definition. So I would like to discuss the difference between genealogy and family history. There is a little bit of a difference. We use these terms interchangeably, but if we discover the nuance of these terms, we can see that it can help us broaden our pursuits and sort of fine-tune our goals and what we're trying to accomplish with genealogy. So genealogy is a scholarly study. It is focused on the historic, geographic, and social context of our family, and it sort of provides a bigger picture of lineage through generations. This contrasts to family history. Family history is usually focused on specific traditions within family units. It's usually about a few people or a few generations of family, and it has a more narrow focus. How this matters and how this plays into our genealogical pursuits is a nod to the way that family relationships and the definition of family itself is a very complicated matter. If we only consider things from a genealogical perspective, we might be leaving out very important people in our family that are also related to us, but maybe not necessarily through lineage or through family in a blood sense. So how this matters is when we consider, adoptions, or we consider foster children. If we are telling a family history, we want to be sensitive and include those members of our family. When we just focus on genealogy, we're focusing on lineage. So in order to tell a broad history of our family and a more complete picture of our family, we need to both pursue genealogy in the lineage sense, but also family history so that we include everyone. I also want to discuss, before we begin the more specific sort of genealogical questions, I just want to highlight some ethical and legal issues that we need to be aware of when we are pursuing genealogy and family history. So the first thing is that oftentimes, as we know, family relationships are complicated, and sometimes these pursuits bring up uncomfortable truths that we were not previously aware of. So as a way to mentally prepare ourselves for the things that we might discover, it's important to acknowledge that there might be things that we don't know, or things that we thought we knew that are actually not the case, and we just want to be prepared for the unknown. It's also really important that we respect living relatives and their connections and experiences to the people that we are charting in our genealogical pursuits. People that are alive that still have connections to people that have passed away, those relationships are very real to them, and it's important that we operate in a respectful way. And with that being said, you know, different people have different ideas and definitions about privacy. Although sometimes as a librarian, I seem like I'm really outgoing, I'm actually a very private person. So if someone in my family published or made public on a website personal information about me, I would be very offended and find that to be repugnant. So we just need to make sure that we are respecting our family members and their wishes. There's a website out there called Living Relatives, and it gives users the opportunity to publish information about their living family members. So that is why I bring that up. I would be very cautious about that website. Again, just remind you that we have to work in an ethical frame. The other thing that I want to bring up is that fact finding doesn't necessarily fall under copyright, but information that you find on databases does. So the reason that happens is because while the actual facts, so the raw data that you discover, like for example, a birth certificate, that's not something that's copyrighted, but excuse me, pardon me, I apologize. But the way that information is presented oftentimes is copyrighted. So the information that's on Ancestry, that database itself is copyrighted. So you have to be very careful when you're publishing information. Just make sure that you know that you're working within the bounds of copyright to protect yourself. And, you know, as I said, just make sure you check before you publish. Anytime you're going to publish this information, you want to be sensitive to all of these things. So I wanted to bring up a quick list of supplies that I think would be helpful in your pursuits. So I'm a huge fan of notebooks and writing things down in analog style. A lot of people that I experience that are researching often keep notes in their cell phones, and I think that is valid and has a place. And if that's how you like to keep your notes, more power to you. But I do think that there's certain times when a notebook is more helpful. Again, that is something that is a personal choice, but I would encourage, if you are more inclined to digital forms of note taking, to maybe explore note taking in a physical notebook. Because we are in a digital age, a computer is absolutely necessary if you want to pursue anything related to genealogy. There are a lot of resources, which we're going to discuss later on, that you can access using a computer. If you don't have access to a computer, you don't have a computer yourself, I encourage everyone to go to a public library. We have computers available and you can get access that way. The third thing on a list of supplies that I highly, highly, highly recommend is several pairs of cotton gloves, white cotton gloves. The reason that I bring this up is because photographs, though today we don't work in a physical medium as in terms of photographs as we once did. These photographs still exist and they're still in your family history. And there have, as an archivist, the amount of times that I've seen photographs destroyed by improper handling, it's just too many to count. And it's damage that's all absolutely 100% avoidable. You can get cotton gloves at any hardware store, local hardware store, anywhere, also at Joann's Fabric. I would say get more than one pair because over time, the photographs and the things that are on the photographs, dust and stuff like that, tends to stay on the gloves. You don't want to wash them, because if you do, the chemicals that you're washing them with will get onto the photograph. It's best just to buy a 5-pack, and after you've handled the photographs for a while with one set, to throw them away and start with a new pair. This is particularly important depending on the medium. So for example, glass plate negatives are very vulnerable to fingerprints, but as a general rule, all photographs and their negatives should always be handled 100% of the time with a pair of cotton gloves. The last thing on our list of supplies would be books. It's an old-fashioned medium, but sometimes the internet lies. And books tend to be a stable form of information. They tend to be peer-reviewed and checked more. So there are a ton of titles that I'm going to recommend a little bit later in the presentation. But again, don't underestimate the power of a good old-fashioned book in your pursuits. So let's move on and talk specifically about where you should start these pursuits. The good news is you can start in your living room. I know some of us are sick of our living rooms. I don't happen to be one of those people. I love being in my living room, but you can start in your living room with gathering family records, documents, and documenting your own personal knowledge about your family. It's a really good idea to start this sort of fact-finding mission in the beginning. This can be, birth certificates. This can be tax records. This can be photographs. Are a particularly powerful way of finding out about your ancestors. So starting with where you're at, with the knowledge that you already have, jotting notes, leading to our second point, filling in the gaps that you don't have, filling in the information that you don't have with a family survey. I think this is a great idea. I have not developed one for my own family, but I certainly intend to do that. It is a great way to gather information. There are a lot of applications that are available nowadays that can allow you to easily gather family surveys. So there's this great website called SurveyMonkey that has a free version that allows you to set up digital surveys. I recommend that you survey your family because they can be powerful sources of information. They could be powerful sources of misinformation as well. So I would just keep that in mind. We'll discuss that a little bit later on in the program. And then finally, again, if you can sense a theme here, I really encourage people to do things the old-fashioned way. Finding a pedigree chart is very easy. You are able, as you can see from here, I searched pedigree chart genealogy, and there are hundreds of pedigree charts out there that you can print. Even though, again, the internet is a powerful tool, we can really benefit from having things written out in an analog way. So let's start. Now that we have sort of discussed the first steps, let's discuss the next step, which would be locating primary source records for our genealogical pursuits. So as we had discussed earlier in our definition of genealogy, it is a scholarly pursuit. So all scholarly pursuits require evidence. We can get evidence in sources such as oral histories and personal papers. We can find evidence in birth, marriage, and death certificates. Census records are a really powerful place to find information. Military records help tell our family stories, immigration and naturalization records, and finally, land, probate, and tax records. Local sources like that are all very powerful indicators of the family story and the family history. So I don't know about you, but when I look at that list of information, I get a little bit, that's a lot of different records, and it's really confusing to know, where do we find these records? And I also wanted to mention that oftentimes we discuss this family of records as vital records. So especially birth, marriage, and death certificates. That's another word for these. I use the word primary source because I like it, but vital records are also another word you can use. So as I discussed, it can be really confusing. Where do we find, how do we find these? So I made a little chart for us to sort of narrow down and kind of get a better idea of where we can find these different record types. So at the local level, cemeteries, city directories, newspapers, wills and estates, and vital records are all accessed at the local level. As an example, at the Colin T. Naylor Jr. archives, we keep detailed records about several cemeteries in the area, including information about what the stones themselves say, dates of death, and things like that. City directories help us locate individual citizens, but also information about businesses that our family members might have owned, and those can be really wonderful. We also at the Colin T. Naylor Jr. archives keep newspapers on microfilm, finding obituaries, which is more on that later, is something that we can also do. At the state and federal level, we can get access to census records, military and pension records, naturalization records. It's important to note those records exist after 1922. Before that, there's different ways that we track that. Land grants are also another powerful source of evidence. And finally, something that I think a lot of people overlook, church records. So we can find out a lot about our ancestors when we consider the causes that they donated to. If they happen to be members of the clergy, and sacrament records are also kept by churches. So this gives us an indication about things like baptism, marriage, and death. We might also find those records in vital record searches, but we could also, again, with sacrament records, they can be a really great fact checking and sort of balancing data from church records against local records can really help us in our search. So that brings us to access to resources. So now that I know which records are located where, how do I find specific access to those records? In the way of local sources, this is my favorite part of the presentation, by the way, because I absolutely, as an archivist and as a librarian, love to discuss where to find things. It is something that I find a lot of joy in. So forgive me if I'm a little bit too smiley about this. So the first place that I would say to check, so as we discussed in the previous slide, newspapers are a really great place to find information. Obituaries exist in newspapers. So at the Colin T. Naylor Jr. archives, we are so incredibly lucky. And I would just like to say the amount of work that was put into this database before in previous generations in Peekskill is something that we should be incredibly proud of. It's a very powerful search tool that is an exciting thing to be a part of. And it's just a really exciting thing. So I want to draw your attention to that. In the field library, if you go to peekskill.org and you click on the Explore tab, you can go down to the obituary index and it will bring you to this page. It is an index of death notices which appeared in Peekskill newspapers. You can start your search by clicking on the blue box. You fill in the appropriate information. My internet's running a little bit slow, I think, because of the presentation. But you can find anyone who has died in Peekskill that we have. We monitor current newspapers to add to this obituary. It's constantly added to. So I really encourage you to visit it and to take a look at it. Next thing that I wanted to share with you was a list of the Westchester County Clerk's offices. This is where you are going to get your, whoopsies, sorry about that. Let's see here. Let's go back here, pardon me. So the list of Westchester County clerk's offices is going to be helpful for anybody that's looking for any kind of marriage, any kind of vital record. You will go to your local, so for example, town of Cortland, we would go to the town of Cortland and you can find their phone number, give them a call and let them know that you're looking for vital records, and they'll give you information on how to access those no matter where you are. So if you're not joining us from New York, you could Google county clerk's offices with your county and you'll be able to find that information. So we in New York, we are very lucky because, so I should mention the vital records for everybody that does not, so anybody who's outside of the city of New York will get their vital records from the Westchester County Clerk's Office. If you were born in the city of New York, the New York City Municipal Archives is a great resource for you to visit. They have a wonderful website. This is an amazing, actually, to have access to this is pretty incredible. As New Yorkers, we're extremely lucky to have this website. So if you are looking for or seeking vital records from New York City, this is where you visit, and they can get you on your way. And the last thing that I want to discuss in terms of local sources specific to our library and to Westchester Library System are the resources at the Field Library and at WLS. So I made a list. I love our library, our ability to create lists. I'm forever doing this. So if you are, and even if you're not within the library, Westchester Library System, this is a list of books that I recommend. We're going to be making this available at the end of the presentation. This is a list of just different resources that we have that I recommend. I will continue to add to this list and it will stay at this link. I'm not going to be taking it down, so check back often. This particular book, Genealogy for Beginners, I think is really great. It has some amazing resources. I don't want to get into each individual resource because I could talk about this for hours, and I know we don't have that today, but definitely I'm going to be sending out some a sheet to anyone who's interested, and this list will be included on that sheet. So opening up our access to resources at the state level, there are a lot of we're very lucky to be in the state of New York. So I wanted to bring this resource up. This is birth, marriage, and divorce records in the state of New York. Again, you can see at the top for New York City records, you visit there, but so outside of New York City, there's information that is available. You can click on what type of record you're looking for, and you will be able to be directed to the correct place. And then moving along, I really want to encourage anybody who lives in the state of New York, and also if you don't live in the state of New York, to visit your state archives. There are wonderful people who do amazing work that spend a lot of time making information available. Although these archives, particularly in the state of New York, they do not hold any vital records, but they do hold indexes, and they do hold a lot of other resources that are amazing resources. So take a look at this page. It's got genealogy topics, things are listed by topic. There's some really powerful tools, particularly this naturalization pathfinder is wonderful. The probate records and real estate pathfinder is also very powerful and can be quite beneficial. And then the other thing that I want to bring to your attention is the research tips that they list. Take some time with this information and get to know it. There's so many different record types in genealogy that it often takes a long time to get to know these different record types. And so any state archives, if you, let's say you live in Rhode Island, if you Google Rhode Island State Archives, you will find a similar tab on their website. So I encourage you to explore that. Whoops, we don't want to listen to the radio right now. Pardon me, I'm sorry. The next, so let me get back to my guide. Oh, the final thing that I want to bring up at the state level, and again, this is something, it doesn't just happen in New York State, it happens everywhere. Explore a genealogical and biographical society. We have this really close to us. They are based in New York City. So here in the Hudson Valley, we're really lucky because we can go visit them very easily. But take a look at their collections and resources and their research. They have a whole page, Start Your Research Here. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And then finally, in the way of access to resources, there are some federal, there's some records at the federal level and resources at the federal level that are really incredible. I'll let you go through these links on your own time. I don't want to spend, I don't want to bore everybody. I know it's exciting for me, but it's not necessarily as exciting for everybody else. But I will click on the Smithsonian Library link and just kind of to give you an idea. Oops, pardon me. This particular resource guide is very information rich, so I don't want people to get overwhelmed when they see it. But it is absolutely wonderful. It's a lot of resources, and it's sort of just like in this list, and you're like, oh my gosh. But you know, if you're like me, and I'm sure there's genealogists out there with us today that are just sort of they do this on their own time, you know, kind of in their downtime, it's worth a check. You know, it's worth checking out. Just wonderful things. I learned wonderful things that I did not know about before. So highly recommend the Smithsonian libraries. The National Archives also, so the National Archives, NARA, also has a lot of information about where to get started. They have wonderful, wonderful tips on preservation when you get to that point in your pursuits. If you find some records that need to be cared for, you can also get a lot of really amazing resources at the National Archives website. They have a devoted genealogy page, and they're really great because when you're trying to access some of the federal federal census records or military records, they're really great because all of that, because those records come from there, they're really centrally located. So that is a really wonderful resource as well. So on a final note, I just want to encourage everybody to check out the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center. They are the largest genealogy library in the United States, and they have a ton of resources. Again, I'm going to send this around at the end of the program. Anyone who's interested can get a list of these links. Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center is sort of like the gold standard in terms of genealogy research. I know people who have gone on adventures just to go there. I believe they are accepting visitors again, although don't quote me on it. But if you want to go on a genealogy vacation, I certainly recommend going to Indiana and taking a look at their facility. It's wonderful. And finally, in our long list of resources, there are three things that I really want to highlight. The first is Cindy's list. So as I had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of resources out there, and sometimes the internet lies to us, but one place that we can count on being good information is Cindy's list. It is also another one of those resources that's very information rich. I'd like to pull your attention to their categories. This is a really great way to sort of explore what they have. And as you can see, there are just, it's overwhelming. And a wonderful way to spend a Sunday morning would be to sort of explore and take a look at that. The second website that I want to sort of highlight for you today is Evidence Explained. Evidence Explained is this amazing. This helps you with citation. So anytime you find records, it's really important that you cite them properly. And this site helps you know how to do that. It helps you understand how to cite databases, helps you understand how to evaluate evidence. It's just absolutely wonderful, and I couldn't highly recommend it. And it's just an absolutely wonderful wonderful resource that everybody should explore at some point. And then finally, I know a lot of people may have been expecting that we would go, this was going to be about family search and about ancestry.com. I am much more prone to doing research the ordinary old-fashioned way, but I do recommend getting a family search account. They have a free version. Their content on family search tends to be free or tends to be more accessible. And one of the things that I want to draw to your attention is the search bar on family search. They have a wonderful research wiki that has something like 100,000 articles. And you can search by country. It's absolutely a very powerful and a wonderful research. You can get guided research to help you find databases. There's centers and libraries. They just have so many amazing things. So take some time with Family Search's research wiki. I think you'll enjoy it. I really think it's a great resource that's also affordable. So as we enter the last sort of little bit about our presentation, I want to discuss, citation. So again, I wanted to reiterate that citation is extremely important, but not to worry, there's resources for that. Again, Evidence Explained is a really great place to understand citation. Again, it's a scholarly, genealogy and family history is a scholarly endeavor. It's really important that we cite properly. If you ever have any questions about citation, please do not hesitate to reach out. I spent a lot of time in the academic environment before I came to the field library. And so citation is something that I feel very comfortable with and would love to help you. Finally, so now that we've sort of laid everything out and we're reaching the end, I will say that there's a couple of odds and ends that I want to bring up. And the first is sort of a sensitive topic among genealogists and family historians. We are engaged as genealogists and family historians. We're engaged in very important work, especially helps us, again, place our family in historic, geographic, and social context. And in order to do that, it's really important that we acknowledge that there are a lot of free resources out there, but records cost money to care for and duplicate. So when we reach a point where we have to pay for some resources, I think it's a really good idea to just acknowledge that there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. So for example, at Vital Records, so local governments that maintain these records, often the people that are responsible for returning your request are underpaid. They wear many hats. They're often stressed out. So just being sort of sensitive to the fact that these records, they do cost money to duplicate and to care for. So that's why it's not, nobody's trying to be evil, and, nobody's making millions of dollars off Vital Records requests. I can guarantee you that 100%. So just try to be aware of that. The thing that I think is that I really want people to take from this presentation is considering becoming a caretaker for your family papers. Family papers aren't just photographs. So your grandparents and your great-grandparents' marriage certificate. My grandparents' marriage certificate happens to hang in the wall of the family home, and I've always loved it. It is, back then when marriage certificates were created, they were often beautiful and displayed. So don't overlook any kind of, just because it's not a photograph doesn't mean that it doesn't tell a part of your family's history. And if you are willing to take on these family papers, I think that it's a wonderful thing to do for your family, and especially for future generations, is to make sure that everything is organized and put in a place. So yes, I'd highly recommend that. Consider joining a genealogical society. There's a lot of people out there that are doing the same thing as you. You can learn from their experiences and from their research. And similarly, take a look on social media. There's a lot of really fun genealogical groups, and a lot of people that are doing wonderful work in that field. And anytime you interact with their pages, they are thrilled. I can tell you that from personal experience. And so, sort of on that note, let us transition to the I want to take a moment to plug the Colin T. Naylor Jr. Archives page, as well as the Field Library Instagram. We do a ton of work at the archives and at the Field Library to make engaging content for our users. And anytime you comment with something, it makes our day. I know I personally get so excited, even when somebody is like, oh, wow. It just makes that work feel like it's worth it. So come check out the Colin T. Naylor Jr. Facebook page. Check out the library Facebook page. We would love to have you as a user, and as a follower. So with that being said, we have reached the end of our presentation. So if there's any questions, you can always, and if you have questions and need to reach out to me after this presentation, here's my contact information. I'd be really happy to hear from anybody. And yeah, I'm going to take a look at the chat here and see if there are any questions. Are you with me, Francisco?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I am